Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Anti-Racist Pandemic Parenting. My name is Victoria Brewick, and I am Pandemic Parenting's digital content producer. We are so excited to have all of you joining us tonight, and we recognize that for many of you, this might be your first time joining one of these webinars. This is part of our bi-weekly Pandemic Parenting Exchange series. In each webinar, our panelists offer science-based knowledge, experience, and resources to help you and your family cope during the pandemic. To stay up to date on the latest webinars and all the resources that we are putting out on our website, you can follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list. And in just a moment, I'll drop links to all of that in the chat. If you would like, we invite you to tweet along tonight, things that stand out to you, things you're learning with hashtag Pandemic Parenting to keep the conversation happening over on Twitter. Lastly, I'll be in the background sharing links and other resources. So if you don't have a chance to catch all of those, know that this webinar is recorded. And so you will be able to find those links as well as a recording of the full webinar on our website in a few days. As well as if you're subscribed to our email list, you'll be notified when that's available. With that, I will introduce the two co-founders of Pandemic Parenting, Amanda and Lindsay. Dr. Amanda Zelahewski is a clinical and forensic psychologist and associate professor of psychology at Valparaiso University. Dr. Lindsay Malloy is a developmental and forensic psychologist and an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. You can read more about both of them and their backgrounds on our website. With that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you with us. We're so excited about tonight's conversation. Lindsay and I have been wanting to have this conversation for many, many months, so we're so excited that it is finally here. So I want to just talk a little bit about how tonight's going to work. Typically, if you've joined us before, you know that we always have a current student or an emerging scholar serve as one of our moderators. But for tonight's topic, it felt particularly important to both Lindsay and myself for us to just be in the background. So for us to moderate in many ways, and really we're just here to listen and learn from the three excellent experts that we're so lucky to have with us tonight. So we're actually going to be moderating tonight so that we really are just sort of more in the background and listening and learning. So part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation is, you know, we've been paying a lot of attention and trying to do a lot around anti-racism efforts throughout the summer, right? There was a lot of, you know, racial reckoning. We've seen lots of terms, the summer of racial unrest, right? There are a lot of ways that we were trying to all be involved in part of the conversation, but then things got busy. You know, we know that parents, just like us, were still managing kids at home and work at home during a pandemic. But it's also important for us to remember that the work isn't done from it. And so we want to find ways to stay engaged in the work of raising anti-racist children in spite of our pandemic fatigue. And Lindsay and I think it's really important for white parents like us to recognize that our fellow parents of color or parents raising children of color don't have the luxury of stepping in and out of this conversation, of putting the work down for a while. They're living it every day and trying to keep their kids safe. And so it's also on us to step up and help in whatever ways that we can. So we know that we're probably going to get some of it wrong, but Lindsay and I are going to do our best. We're committed to staying in the arena to keep learning how to do better. And again, we're so grateful for our experts joining us tonight to help us with that conversation. And we're also really grateful to you all for joining us and sharing your experiences and your questions and thoughts on this topic. So we will start the session with our panelists, guest experts, followed by some Q&A at the end. We've got lots of questions we've kind of pulled together. Many of you submitted them ahead of time, so we're really excited with this wonderful list of questions. So as Victoria said, please feel free to post additional questions in the Q&A box throughout the discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to tell you about our fabulous panel.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, we've had some really, really good questions so far, but definitely post more. We are very lucky to have three fantastic experts with us tonight. And like Amanda said, we're just going to be really asking the questions this time, not providing content. So first, we have Dr. Y. Joy Harris-Smith. Dr. Harris-Smith is a scholar in the field of communication and culture. She's currently a senior lecturer in speech communication at Princeton Theological Seminary in Princeton, New Jersey. And in addition to demonstrated excellence in her teaching and presenting, Dr. Harris-Smith is a co-author of the book, The ABCs of Diversity, Helping Kids and Ourselves Embrace Our Differences, published by Chalice Press very recently in June 2020. Dr. Travis Heath is a licensed psychologist and associate professor of psychology at Metropolitan State University of Denver. He's currently on a one-year leave and serving as a visiting clinical associate professor at the University of Denver, where he's directing the Trauma, Disaster, and Recovery Clinic, as well as serving as the director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Graduate School of Professional Psychology. He is currently co-authoring the first book on contemporary narrative therapy. So welcome to you both. And we have also Miss Leslie Priscilla Arreola-Hillenbrand, she is a first-generation non-Black Chicana with Raramuri lineage. She's a mother to 3 biracial children and a certified parent coach with over 13 years of experience. Leslie offers coaching, workshops, support, and advocacy for Latinx Chicanx families, locally, nationally, and internationally via Latinx Parenting. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that tonight. She will soon begin a coaching series on decolonized nonviolent parenting, which you can read more about at latinxparenting.org. And I think Victoria is going to pop that info into the chat for you. If you miss any of the links that are coming kind of rapid fire in the chat, don't worry, we'll post all of these on our resources page after we post the recording of this webinar. So all 3 of our experts bring different expertise, different lived experiences related to tonight's topic, and we're just really grateful to them for being here and having this conversation with us tonight. So I think, Amanda, you are going to ask the first question.
Yeah. Thanks. So to start off, we just wanted to give each of our guests a chance to make any introductory comments to sort of orient us to their work and their perspectives on this topic. So Joy, if we can have you unmute your camera and audio, and maybe you can start us off.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I am a scholar in the field of communication and culture. My co-author and I came together similarly as the founders of Pandemic Parenting as 2 moms coming together, wanting to have a conversation and kind of just give people, particularly parents, some ways to begin having the conversation. We found people wanted to talk but didn't know how. And so the book is really just an opportunity to help people begin. There are lots of resources in the back that have books and films and questions, and even the framework itself is built to be foundational to go from inside and then to outside. So the goal really is just to provide people with beginning tools to enter into the conversation about race, about racism, and it's a journey. It's not a destination. And so we hope that the book will help people begin the journey.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Travis, how about you? Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here. First, I'll thank my partner who's doing my labor with my 8 and 4-year-old. I'd usually be bathing them. It's great to be here, but I just want to honor the labor she's doing that I should probably rightfully be doing right now. So my work, just quickly, I've been interested in anti-colonial approaches to psychotherapy. And I've been working on that for, 6 or 7 years. And all of a sudden, in the last few months, lots of folks have interest in anti-colonial and decolonial approaches, right? So it's kind of interesting how quickly that shifted. And also, I do a lot of systems work. So I'm interested in how systems impact people. So those are probably my 2 biggest areas of interest.
Thank you. Leslie, how about you?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I work mainly with Latinx Chicanx parents, and we also work from a decolonial, anti-colonial framework, and we integrate that with the practice of nonviolence. And so it's very much reflective work that we invite parents to do with us and really understand our own biases around parenting, around race, around the values that have been traditionally passed on, and really kind of unpack whether they serve us and whether they bring us closer to liberation or not. And so it's really been an honor, I think, for me to witness all of the learning and unlearning that has had to happen in my culture, especially in the last 6 months. and the response has been really great. So I'm just very privileged to be here with all of you today and excited to learn as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all again for being here. I'm just going to jump right into the questions if that's okay, because we had so many great ones submitted and we want to make sure we get to as many as we can. So first, why shouldn't parents, and this might seem very basic to all of you who study these things and engage with these topics every day, but why shouldn't parents teach their kids to be quote unquote colorblind? Joy, do you want to take it first?
Okay.
Sorry.
I think when you start to, it's somewhat of an erasure, right? To say that you don't see it. And that's problematic. One of the things that I talk about in the book is to honor the similarities and to respect the differences, because I think that that's key. We are all similar in that we are all human beings. And so to see, you need to see me. You honor my humanity when you see me, and not just the parts that you want to see. So colorblind is more of an erasure than it is, some helping, which is what I know some people believe that they're doing.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. And I think I don't know if I think that that was definitely the sort of, I grew up in the 80s, like that was the kind of, was thought to be a positive thing, right? It was a way to, and maybe that hasn't changed that much, but hopefully it's moving in that direction. Travis or Leslie, do you want to add anything?
I'll just add a little bit, and it also erases the history, right? The history of colonialism and the imperialist tactics, that have been used. And so it creates this erasure now, but it also erases the histories that are at play, which I think is very dangerous, right? Like if it's really hard to step into a practice of anti-racism or decoloniality if we don't honor the histories that have been a part of it, right? So, and that's a question I always ask is like, what histories are at play? Like any initiative I'm involved with, one of the first things I think about, whether it's psychotherapy or whether it's at a university or with a community group, is like, what are all the different histories that are in the room with us here?
Right. Thank you.
I want to just echo both of those. And I am thinking about, my mom is in another room watching my kids right now, and she tells a story about how when I was growing up, I must have been about 3 or 4, and we were in line at the grocery store, and there was a Black man next to us. And I said, "Look, Mom, he's Black." And she said, "Don't say that. You can't say that around people who are Black." And he turned around and very graciously said, she tells me this story, I don't remember this, but he says, "No, you have to let her know that I am Black, and I'm proud to be Black." And so that was a lesson for her that she still brings up, that she says, that was the first time that I actually realized that it was okay to point out those differences and not just point them out, but realize that it's something that, Black people celebrate, that we want to celebrate our differences. And so I very much want to raise my children with that celebration of differences.
I love that you just brought that story up, because that is a question we received from tons of parents. Like, what do I do when my kids say something that is embarrassing like that or potentially offensive in public? Because I think the instinct is to do, exactly what you just recounted in that story. So what advice do you have for parents who are really wanting to help their kids, be anti-racist, recognize all the beautiful colors and diversity and cultures around them, but are so worried about offending? I don't know if anybody wants to start. Yeah, go ahead, Joy.
Yeah, I just had somebody ask that question. Well, first, I think parents need to take a big, deep breath, inhale and exhale, because the moment is really not about you. It is really about a child trying to either understand or make a connection about their world, or they are repeating something or exhibiting a behavior that they have learned. And so, it's really, at that point, it's take a break, not take a break, but take a breath, and then figure out, can this be dealt with in this moment? In other words, the man that Leslie mentioned was gracious enough to turn around and say, it's fine, it's okay. And so that was helpful. But the parent can I address this? And I'll give you a perfect example. My son and daughter, they're six. My son is 6, my daughter is 4. We were getting into elevator in our building, and a neighbor was already there. I don't know the person. I realized my son and daughter were looking. They said hello. The person said hello back. And I realized my kids were looking at the person, and I didn't notice why. And then as the elevator door opened on the first floor, I realized why they were looking. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And, of course, the elevator door closes very slowly at this moment. And my son asked, Mommy, is that a boy or a girl? And I was like, okay, great. Because I honestly didn't know. And so as I'm still frantically looking for my keys in the moment, he says it again. This time the elevator door closes, and I said, okay, I can do one of two things. I can either try to continue to ignore him, or actually just deal with it in the moment. What do you think? What do you think? And so he told me what he thought. And I said, I'm not sure, but you might be right. I said, but what's most important is that the person is being a good neighbor. They spoke and we spoke. And that was what's most important. Few things. He's also learning about gender stereotypes and who appears what. Or how each, gender is supposed to appear, or at least what he's learned at this point at 6 years old. I couldn't give a definitive answer, but I wanted him to tell me what it was that he thought. And that also helped us to kind of have the conversation. And I, as a parent, can say, I don't know. And that can be okay. And I think it's helpful when parents can say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or that's a great question. Can I answer that when we get in the car? Or can I answer that when we get in the house? So if you can't deal with it in the moment, after you take a second to breathe, say, that's a great question, but can I think about that on the way to the car or on the way to the house? And then follow it up. So that way, I think that's a great way to begin, to realize that it's not about you being embarrassed. It's okay to feel that way because, they're a reflection of us, but it's about trying to take a moment and be present and figure out, well, what is this kid trying to make sense of and understand and deal with that? And then the embarrassment it dissipates. You remember it, but it dissipates.
I like that. Thank you. It's a great story. Anyone else want to add anything there? Thanks. Okay, so we had other questions about, and there's been a lot of discussions about, being, how being non-racist is not the same thing as being anti-racist, right? So how can we model for our kids, intentional, proactive anti-racism, and maybe even, I know this is adding another layer, but at different ages. Travis, do you want to jump in first? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm in the classroom and I'm picking on people. So,
well, we signed up to be picked on, right? So okay. It's an honor to be picked on.
That's
no,
true.
This is a great question. The first thing I would say is that so often we treat racism as an individual attitude. And I think this is problematic, right? Because racism, and we hear systemic everything now. What does this really mean? I mean, I think it could be more useful to think of racism as infrastructural, right? Part of the infrastructure, as colonial, meaning, coming from colonizers, right? And people colonizing lands and peoples, and also existential, because it's a matter of life and death. And I think sometimes not just parents, but the impulse is to treat this like an individual attitude, like I'm not racist, right? Or how do I read the right book or assume the right stance? And to me, like the actions, now, of course, there are things we can do, like for me as a person of mixed ancestry, so African, South American, European, right? married to a white woman with white passing children, so it's each of us has our own complicated sort of algorithm sometimes, some more complicated than others, I guess. But like my 8-year-old likes basketball. We were watching the NBA with Black Lives Matter on the court, right? And she says, "Daddy, what's Black Lives Matter mean?" Right? And that's like on a tee, right? Here we go. We can open up the conversation. So those kinds of individual conversations can be good, but if we're really interested in dismantling racism, then I think we have to start asking uncomfortable questions, right? We have to start asking like, well, why are white folks often living in a certain neighborhood, right? Maybe behind gates, if I can stereotype it a bit, and other folks aren't living in that neighborhood. And why are certain folks, often white folks, going to certain schools that Black folks or brown folks aren't going to? And of course, we know the historical answers to this, but often what's happening is white families are reproducing this, even if unwittingly, right? And so when we think about anti-racism, to me, what it is it's shared practice, right? It's moving away from vertical hierarchies and moving towards horizontal ways of organizing our world. And shared practice means that people in relative positions of power have to give something up, and it has to be redistributed. I've been going over this with the university I'm working at pretty heavily this last week. And those things are uncomfortable because folks are like, well, I'll take on the anti-racist stuff. Well, but after my kid gets into the private university that I want them to go to, or after I'm living in the home. So I could say a lot about this, but I'm mindful of not wanting to take up too much space. But I'll just give one quick example and say, like, how about a school board if you have school-age children, right? And participating in that in a way that's decolonizing curriculum or encouraging the decolonization of curriculum. So in other words, not learning this kind of BS history that I learned in school in the 80s and 90s, right? What is our president calling it now? He's sorry if it's too political, but it is what it is. He's calling it patriotic history or something like this, but so being an advocate in the school board to dismantle the curriculum, right? Like that's, again, reading books at home and having conversations with kids, these are good, but they're in sort of individual familial level interventions. And what I would invite people to do in terms of anti-racism is start thinking systemically. What are the community groups that I can be involved with, or I can start to dismantle some of these things? And I'll warn you that it's probably going to bring about some discomfort, especially for white folks, but that's how you know the work's happening. Like if it feels good, if you can do it from a quote unquote safe space, right? From back here, you're probably not actually doing the work.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think I'm going to direct, Leslie, were you going to add to that? Go ahead, because I was actually coming to you next. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell Travis, like, I'm so like hot and on fire in my chest right now. I'm so like, yes. It's been really important for me to understand what my positionality is and what my role is, right? So my role as a parent coach, as a parent educator, as somebody who works with families and seeing the field that I am actively operating in. And I think I even had shared with you all when I was first invited, I said, who are the Black people on this panel? I want to know who is on this panel. And so there's so many instances where I notice where people are not actively anti-racist, and when they are, it's more of a performative thing. And so I think it's really important to notice also, like, what does the commitment look like for organizations, for institutions, for individuals, even when it's not celebrated? Like, I would rather give up my spot for somebody who has the lived experience and not tell anybody. Like, I don't have to tell anybody that I did that, right? Like, it's an embodiment thing. For me. And it's, again, like Travis is saying, like, racism, white supremacy, white superiority, this is the air we're breathing. This is the water that we're swimming in. This is not something that is a binary. This is, I have perpetuated white supremacy as being white presenting. Like, I have to own that. And I want to especially give Latinx, Chicanx people who are white presenting the permission to be able to own the fact that we have all contributed to white supremacy and to white superiority and benefited from it. And so I think, there's no shame in it. I don't feel any shame in it. It's just what it is. And so I think that that's been liberating for me, and I'm hopeful that it will be liberating for others to just say, this is what it is. I perpetuate it, and how do I stop doing that?
Yeah, I want to build off of something Leslie just said. I've had this conversation with a lot of psychologists, clinical psychologists recently, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, and psychologists of color too. But when we are functioning in traditional colonial white supremacist systems, it doesn't matter what our race is. We become de facto white, cis, heteronormative men, right? Because that's who created the systems, and that's the way the systems are functioning, right? So that's why it's not enough just to diversify our systems, right? You can diversify it, but if we're just reproducing the same things, then nothing's really changing. Like the university talks a lot about diversity, but this is why I say no, anti-colonial, decolonial, because if you take us in to the university, but we're expected to just reproduce white supremacy, then nothing's really, well, something's changed. You can put us on the brochure, and you can, and you can change your statistics and all of those kinds of things, right? But I think we have to start thinking about that. It's not just diversity, right? And so maybe for some folks, you've heard the term decolonial, anti-colonial that we're using. Maybe some folks haven't. But the decolonial, anti-colonial part is the action part, not just the diversifying, right? And that's where I think that the work starts.
Thank you. Yeah, it was making me think as you both were talking to, like, and especially Leslie, which I really appreciated when you asked us that question when we invited you to be on this panel. And just to be completely honest, from my perspective, part of my struggle the last few months has been trying to find the balance between recognizing, like, my colleagues of color are exhausted. They're exhausted, right? Because they are being asked, exactly as Travis said, to, step up, and people who are all of a sudden interested in learning about these things are paying attention when, we should have for a long time. So it's this balance of, wanting to amplify the people with the lived experiences, but also do the work ourselves as white people and white parents, and not expect our colleagues and friends and fellow parents of color to keep teaching us how to do this. So that is a balance I am continuing to struggle with. And I'm sure I'm going to keep getting wrong in lots of ways. I just really appreciate both of you sort of naming how important it is to lift up the voices and listen to the voices with the lived experiences, but to also recognize, like, how exhausting that is to be expected to just keep teaching people who need to do some of the research themselves. So yeah, go ahead, Lindsay, do you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to say, and also that I think a lot of people want the simple solution of, like what Travis was hinting at, that, well, can you just give me the book to read, and then I'll read the book and I'll be anti-racist and everything will go, when it's actually much deeper and much more about the systems in place and all of the different, like the Bronfenbrenner model of all of the, different systems, as opposed to just, well, I fixed me and my kid, and so everything is okay.
Yeah. So why don't I just bring us back, if we can, for a minute to parenting, but parenting also in general in a pandemic. So, Leslie, you mentioned, like, you've been working with lots of Latinx families, especially recently through the pandemic. So from all of your perspectives, but we'll start with you, Lindsay, like, why has pandemic parenting been so much harder for families of color? What's going on there?
You said Lindsay, so I just want to make sure that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Leslie. I'm sorry. I was looking at you. I'm so sorry. Jeez, I'm sorry, Leslie. I was coming to you.
That's okay. I think, part of what has been really difficult, I think, especially for the parents that I work with, is that we are a collective community. Like, we operate best when we are in collective spaces. And that's actually part of the reason that, like, so many of us have still gathered in large gatherings. And, like, I live in a city that's 75% Mexican. Or Mexican American. And so I, like, hear the fiestas all over the place, since March, they haven't slowed down. And so I think that part of it has just been because we don't do well with not being in community. What's been really brilliant is that the younger generations have really supported our parents. I've noticed that, like, one of the bigger issues is, like, how do I support my parents? Now I'm having to parent my parents through this pandemic. For the older generations, our elders. But I think that it's been, a space to be creative and to actually return to Indigenous kinship practices, right? And to really involve our children and to really involve our elders and to really be in family again. And I think part of what colonialism has taught us is that our children are burdens, right? It's like you go and you put your child in the school, and mind you, like they started off as residential schools in the United States. And so now that I actually pulled my daughter out of school completely. I know that that's a privilege, and I know that not everybody has that option, but because I started wanting more of that Indigenous experience of having my children be an active part of my life, and so they're constantly in and out of Zoom calls. They're constantly, helping me with dinner, and I love it, and so I think that the invitation is to look at how people have survived, and not just survived, but thrived for time immemorial, not seeing children as burdens, not seeing children as interruptions in daily life, and really incorporating our children into our daily lives so that we can thrive.
Yeah. I was just talking with a mom friend today over text as we were both frustrated, and reminding her, right, that for me, sometimes the way in the middle of the grind of this, of trying to work and parent your kids, those times that I want to say, I can't believe I have to fill in the blank, to just switch one word, right? I can't believe I get to, and it just totally can change your frame. So Joy or Travis, do you want to add to what Leslie said? Go ahead.
I just want to quickly say, like, it's not to negate the hardship. Like, it's not
absolutely
to negate how difficult it is, but everything is hard right now. So
yeah. So somebody have something else? No, I was going to say, building off of that, of everything is hard right now. We wanted to talk a little bit about, or have you talk about, why this whole idea of pandemic parenting has been much harder for parents of color right now, or I guess the last 6 months or so.
Yeah,
well, I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Joy. I've talked enough.
I mean, I think depending on, the industry that you're in, right? I know here in New York City, a lot of people who are working in certain types of service positions who have to continue working, whose children are doing school remotely, who have to show up and risk, right, being impacted by what's happening right now, who don't have options. And then, people who are in the medical field. I mean, I have mom friends who are nurses. And so, not going to work is not an option. But then, people who are driving the buses and the trains, or people who are just trying to make ends meet. So I think it becomes layered for people of color because the intersectionality about where you work, and about, how that feeds into your finances, and, all of those things start to tie in together, and you don't get to sort of section these things out. And many people forget that. And so that's part of the reason why it becomes difficult, because your race, your class, all of those things, you feel those things 3 times over. I don't get to feel one aspect of my identity. I experience them all. And so a lot of parents of color are experiencing all, hashtag all the things, because they're trying to put food on the table. They're trying to deal with the realities of education. They're trying to deal with the fact that there's probably no more stimulus money coming, right? They have to deal with all of that stuff. And other parents, other communities, other groups of people don't necessarily have that struggle because, well, we already know that there's a wealth gap. So, there's $500, right? Maybe, where other people have, savings upon savings, or they can refinance a home. So that, it just gets layered for parents of color in those race, class, and a number of other variables. Creates parenting in a pandemic for families of color that much more challenging.
Right.
Yeah. So the pandemic part, of course, then reveals some of the systemic racism that exists, right? And then we see Black folks being murdered in the street by the police, and so you see that part. And like for me, what really hit me, and my house is an interesting house, being married to a white woman, being mixed race. My 4-year-old, super white passing, blonde hair, and like so. And my 8-year-old has a bit darker skin, but lighter than mine. And so I was telling you when she noticed the Black Lives Matter on the court, the NBA court, and we started getting into a conversation about it. And she knew some of what was going on because we discussed it a bit before. But then seeing her fear and saying like, Daddy, are you going to be okay? What happens if you get pulled over by the police? And that, like, carrying that kind of conversation. And I have, it's not for this panel, but I have, my own history from when I was younger and my own experiences with the police. So, carrying all of that, and then going and being a psychologist and an educator, and trying to be a partner and a dad and do all of those things, but sort of carrying that with me. And it's interesting because, some folks were like, well, this racism stuff, it started 7 months ago, or I don't know, however many months ago. Some folks are like, well, it started 4 years ago when Trump was elected, and it's like, no, I mean, it's from the inception, right? And so like, that's the other thing that I think is tough too, to sort of navigate, is like the way that this is coming to the surface, and the way like, just little things like when folks say, or they tweet or whatever, something like, can you believe this is still America in 2020? And I'm like, yeah, yes, I can. Yes, you bet I can, right? And so carrying all of that, and then also trying to be a parent, like that's really hard. And then there's the everyday stuff, like our 8-year-old's at home and she's upstairs, and then the internet starts working and I'm doing this down. I mean, one of them might burst in here, who knows, right? And then, shuffling all that stuff, and just, not even knowing what day it is. I don't know what today is. I honestly don't. And I think that, obviously that doesn't just impact Black parents of color, but that's still there too for us. So it's this like conglomerate, Joy, you were saying like layers, right? And the intersectionality part. Yeah. I mean, I can really feel that.
I just wanted to say that, phrase, as Travis was talking, that, we have to deal with the fact that racism is sewn into the fabric of the country. And so it is not going to just, there's no 5 steps to removal. This has happened over generations, over centuries. And so the work is just that, it's the work, and it's going to take time. And I think some people realize, I think someone was saying it was going to take 6 or 7 generations. And it's just like, do we have time? Do we even have time for it to take that long? And I think people, because we've been on pause, right? This situation has caused us to be on pause. And as Travis was saying, it's now front and center because everybody has not been able to go on as usual. It's not business as usual. So now people are going, oh, this has been going on all this time. Oh, okay. So now what do we do? But it's sewn into the fabric of our country. And that's something, there's no 5 steps and no magic pill that's going to fix that.
Yeah, so that actually relates to what Jennifer just asked in the Q&A, which was kind of related to, so she said, white folks often think that they are, quote, woke. What do you want or need from us white, quote, woke folks? And it made me think of, Travis, one of my favorite things I've ever seen you tweet, and Travis tweets a lot, so I highly recommend that you follow him. But, I remember seeing your tweet over the summer that said, you don't get to declare yourself my ally. I'll determine that based on your behavior. And that just was so moving to me that it was like, so how can we be better allies? And that's my question for all of you. And Jennifer's question.
So like, I don't like that term ally. DeRay McKesson uses the term accomplice. I like that a little better. A term that I've been playing around with this summer is white cultural activist. Like, I don't need any more damn allies. Like, I don't, but I do need people to organize with. I do need white folks in the community taking action. The white cultural activist, I'm sure someone smarter than me has used that term, so I'm not trying to take credit for it, but it struck me when we were in the early days of the protest in Denver, and some white folks we were, I'm not good at judging distance, maybe 60 feet, 80 feet, I don't know, from the cops, right? And white folks started coming and standing in front of us, right? And that was like a very moving experience. I mean, I've protested a decent amount in my life, but I'd never something quite like that. And this is when it was still dangerous. The rubber bullets and Denver police says it wasn't tear gas. It was some kind of chemical weapon, whatever it was. It sure seemed like tear gas. But so, I mean, there was danger there. Now, listen, I'm not saying that that's the only way to be a white cultural activist, but the gesture of that, it was an action, right? It was an action that someone was taking. And I felt like a sense of solidarity and it didn't feel performative, right? And so, like ally, that doesn't even make sense to me. I don't need allies. I need you to organize with me and organize in your spaces. What's the point of having power if we can't turn it back against itself? So the power and privilege that white folks have, use it, organize, do something with it, right? So anyhow, I mean, I think that's when you said, Amanda, that was one of my tweets, I was like, this could be this could be bad. But no, I'm glad that stuck out and it meant something. And it's just tough because I think a lot of folks want to do something. They're not always exactly sure what to do, right? And they want to stand on the right side of history, so to speak. So I understand that there's some challenges, but many of us are organizing. Ask us. I'll tell you ways that you can help. There are very particular ways in which, like my colleague, Dr. April Alexander, she's a co-leader of Black Lives Matter.
We know
She's
April,
fantastic.
yeah. She's awesome.
She's amazing here in Denver. And I guarantee you, if you talk to her, she'd give you 10 different ways, like off the top of her head, without even thinking about it. Like, we need X, Y, and Z, go, right? And so that to me means a lot more than like the sign in the yard. Now, at some point, the pendulum, like the good thing, when the pendulum starts to swing, like the Denver Broncos came out to the protests eventually, funny enough, the cops didn't beat anyone up then. And part of me was like, this is ugly, I don't like it. But another part of me said, like, okay, it's important that the pendulum eventually swing. Maybe there's white women taking selfies at the protest. That's like no protest I ever saw before, but at least maybe the public opinion is shifting, right? And so there is some value in that. But that to me is like, it's not enough in itself.
Joy or Leslie, you have thoughts? Or I'm also curious about how we can help our kids be white cultural activists as well, or teach our kids to be that way.
Well, I mean, I think one of, the things that is important is for people to take stock of, be honest with yourself and say, well, what privileges do I have? Because I think that oftentimes that's where it starts, your own social location. What privileges do I have? And then you can start to go from there. Or I think as Travis, mentioned and the tweet that was mentioned, when you see something that is wrong, what do? Do you stand and you just watch it occur? How do you help? Do you lend? And I'll give you a perfect example. My mother, God rest her soul, was a nurse. And she was one of those people who would, she sees someone who is visually challenged trying to cross the street, she's going to ask if they need help. She sees someone who is an elder and she's going to see if they need help. One day we were going, I must have been a young adult, and she saw a man lying in the park, and she's a nurse, so she starts to go over. I'm like, Mom, let's just go to the store. And she's just like, and the man is having difficulty breathing. So she yells to somebody to call 911. They do, and she stays on scene. The man is intubated because he's literally suffocating. My mother never told me, when you see someone who is having difficulty, help them. She demonstrated that so that now, out of compulsion, when I see someone, I ask, do you need any help? If they say no, I leave them alone. But if they say, sure, I'll take some help, I assist. And it's because she demonstrated that. She lived that. That's the implicit example that I have. And so I think for parents who are desiring to be allies, to be white cultural activists, the question becomes, what are you demonstrating to your children? And what are some of the privileges you have? And can you step in and get involved? And as it was already said, you don't have to just do it to personal risk, but I know that there are people who live in privilege, but I hate to say go to a soup kitchen because that just seems so common. But it can start as something simple. It doesn't have to be the big, grand thing. But it can start with something, something small but you have to start somewhere. I guess that's really it. It's not, don't look for the big grand thing, because the goal is that you will continue to do it, right? Whatever that is, that your actions will grow, that you'll be vested because it's human. It's, you're investing in humanity, and trying to be a good human. So take stock of the privilege that you do have and figure out what it is that you can do. It can be something as simple as, I don't know, opening up your home for a meal, or delivering a meal to somebody, adopt a senior, or adopt a family, and just, do groceries. I mean, and it doesn't have to be that they have to know who you are. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of anything. It just means you're just meeting another human being where they are. And that can be the start. And I think it's important that we just start somewhere, that you just start somewhere. Yeah.
I love that. I actually, it reminded me of a story from long ago. I won't tell the whole story because there's not enough time, but in just thinking about white privilege and how, these very small things, how we can use that, because one of my best friends, who is a Black woman, she told me this back in grad school. I had encountered the situation at a store and I ended up getting involved in it. And I felt like I wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. And she told me, she's like, Lindsay, you could complain in that situation and you could seek out that solution, and you were not going to look like the angry Black woman. And you could do that for that person. And I mean, and it, because the white privilege, right, wasn't even, this was 15 years ago. I don't think I'd even heard that term yet. I was just kind of blown away by this. This is such a simple thing. It didn't cost me anything. And it would have been a very different situation had, the woman who was, being sort of verbally attacked, had she gotten involved. So just like little tiny things like that to think about too, for parents who are listening. I didn't have kids at the time, but, if they see you engaged in that sort of thing, hopefully they can learn to, stand up and do things like that. Sorry, I'm Amanda, did you have something?
No, it just makes me think. In my kid's bedroom of their bed, in huge letters, it says "Be the one," and it just made me think of what you were describing, Joy. Like, it's just this: you have to start somewhere. Just be the one. Step up, do something, say something. Just as tiny as it is, whatever it is. Like you said, your mom's example of helping somebody cross the street, but just making sure our kids, like, they can't do it if they haven't seen it modeled for them. So I really like that reminder to just start somewhere. Mm-hmm.
There was a question too that I saw come in, because we are at that point now where we're sort of moving into the questions that are coming in, because we want to get to some of those as well. But there's a good question about at what age can we teach children about race, and how do you explain, to children of different ages? Of course, for a lot of kids, you're not having to teach them about it. Sort of the world does that for them. But at what age do you think it's a good idea to start?
Well, I mean, so depending on, if your child is, let's say, in school, I'm thinking of the 2 and 3 year old. and nursery school, maybe, right? They could be at home or nursery school. But let's take for example, children who are going to preschool on somewhat of a regular basis. They are noticing difference. You might not necessarily say, race, but my son, is about 6 years old, and he described one of his classmates, and he said she's white. And so I said, well, how do you know she's white? And he said, well, her skin, is white. And so I know that psychologists know that children notice difference very early on. I mean, it's definitely perceived, but in terms of the interpretive move, that comes a lot later. But you don't have, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you can start to talk to them about not so much as race, but just difference, because they notice difference. They may not have the language as it being race, but you can start with just them noticing difference, because that is something that they notice, and it's developmentally appropriate to say, well, and whether you utilize a book, or whether you talk about the kids in the class, or whether you go for a walk. I mean, the world is your oyster, I guess. Your community, regardless of how it's made up, is just a way to begin to talk about difference. So 2 and 3 and 4, because that's what they're recognizing difference at that stage. So, you're not going to use the term race necessarily, but you can say different or difference, and that can be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo some of that. And also just, there's this experiment from the 50s, I believe, called the Clark doll experiment. And if nobody has heard of it, it's really interesting to look into, because they've done it in all kinds of countries and the results are generally the same. And so what it is children are presented with a black doll and a white doll. And they ask them questions like, which one is the good doll? Which one is the bad doll? Generally, all children will point to the white doll, the blonde doll, and say, this is the good doll, and point to the black doll and say, this is the bad doll. And even if it is a black child, this child will still point to the white one and say, this is a good doll. And so, I mean, they found out that, by the age of 3, not only do they recognize differences, but they understand that white equals power and privilege and positionality, a higher positionality. And it's better, to be lighter in skin color. And so you can start talking about this stuff, I would say, when they're newborns, buy them a black doll. There's all kinds of things you can do. I mean, when you are requesting baby shower gifts, decolonize your bookshelf from the get-go, like ask for anti-racist baby, ask for again, it's not about diversity. It's about these small day-to-day conscious moments of, how can I be anti-racist in this choice that I'm making here? And it doesn't have to be that grand gesture. It could just be, what is the book list that I'm requesting for my son's birthday party? What are the questions I can ask as I'm watching this TV show and diverse voices are not being amplified? And Layla F. Saad, and I do want to mention this before we finish, but she has this really beautiful workshop called White Supremacy and Parenting. You can Google it. But she talks about how, we have a lot of fears around bringing up these things to our children, and that's okay. Like Travis was saying, there's going to be discomfort around it. Embrace that discomfort. Know that you're going to be uncomfortable. Know that you're going to mess up. As you're on this journey of becoming anti-racist, like, this is, for many people, it's not familiar. But you do want to create critical thinkers, and you do want to ask them those questions. Whose stories are being shown here? Whose stories are being left out? Who was this written for? Who, what was the race? What was the positionality of the people that wrote it? Who profits from this narrative? And so I really want to just encourage people to ask those questions, and my daughter and I, my 8.5-year-old, we talk about these things all the time. We have these questions written on the side of our dining room area, because I want to have them on hand whenever we're engaging with media. And so I really, think about those little things that maybe you wouldn't think about when you're watching a TV show. Why is this, how come there's no people of color in this TV show right now? It's not a bad thing, but it's like, let's just have that conversation.
Part of it's like,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Amanda.
No, please go ahead, Travis.
Part of it's like decentering whiteness, like making a conscious effort to decenter it, because like all interests are white. And so since all interests are white, you don't even notice it. Like whiteness sort of just becomes the default. Like I'm thinking about some graduate students the other day talking about like, well, every social justice conversation is about minoritized folks. We don't ever talk about like white men or conservatives. Well, that's what psychology is. It's built from that, right? So what do you mean we don't talk about it? It's all we talk about. All interests are white, cis, heteronormative, right? And so again, when thinking about little things parents can do, just think, how can I decenter whiteness? Whether that's in your reading or in your interactions, right? And recenter other experiences.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue into one of the great questions we got that actually quite a few people are boosting and really want us to ask, which is fantastic. And it's from Isa, and he said, whiteness in itself has been used as a weapon to maintain and sustain white supremacy. How do we transition from, let us learn about other cultures and be culturally competent, to the real work of disarming whiteness, which has been used as a weapon from early on to dismantle white supremacy? So things like decolonizing spaces, communities, and systems. So, Leslie gave some great examples of that, Travis too. So I just didn't know if there's anything else any of you want to add to that question.
Like one of my concerns sometimes with the anti-racism movement here that's going on is that it becomes more about educating white folks than it does about centering and giving humanity to Black folks and brown folks and folks on the margins. And so I disarming whiteness. I feel like this must be a friend of mine or someone fed this question. Like at the university level, I feel like I'm wrestling with this constantly, right? How do we disarm it? To the point, like I was making earlier, that like whiteness, I mean, I was adopted by white parents. Whiteness abounds in my life, right? And so like whiteness, we were talking about privilege earlier too, and whiteness is a part of this. I mean, like people's identities are complex, right? So like I have light skin, Black, brown privilege, right? So that's a privilege I have. I have privilege being a man, right? And so, and whiteness is something that has swirled around me, and it often does become weaponized, but it also becomes it's part of the water supply, right? And so disarming it, I go back to what I was saying earlier about like tough questions. I think we have to unsettle it, right? We have to, like, I know that I won't say de-weaponizing whiteness, but I know I'm unsettling it when you ask that question with a group of people and everyone sort of go, ugh. It's like, especially I'm in mostly white spaces, universities, et cetera. And when you see that happen, it's like, ooh, okay, that maybe we're disarming it a little bit. But to do it like as a whole, I mean, we're fighting 400 years of history here. I'm not trying to be fatalistic, but like Joy said earlier, it's baked into everything, right? And so like my thought is, I don't know if we can disarm it completely, but just what are the little ways we can unsettle it? That's the term that feels all right to me now. I'd love to disarm it. If y'all know how, tell me, but just unsettling it is a chore in itself.
All right, our last question, Lindsay, you got it queued up?
I'm going to ask the last question. Uh-oh.
I got one if you don't have one.
Okay, I wonder if you will pick the same one that I would have picked. Okay, go ahead.
No, I thought a good one to end on. We'll see if we have mind melds. It came in from Christina in Massachusetts, and she was just asking if you could. Yes,
that's the one. That's the one. Yeah.
If you could wave your magic wand and make every parent do one anti-racist thing, what would it be? So I'll let you chew on that, and whoever wants to go first. We've stumped them. Uh-oh.
I said this earlier, but it's my one thing, that racism is not an individual attitude. That if we really want to disarm whiteness, as we were talking about earlier, that we have to do this by organizing. We have to do it at the systemic level, right? And so again, the individual interventions and familiar interventions, I'm all for that. I'm not against it, but it has to be taken up at a systemic level. And even when you hear people talk about it, like I heard folks talking about Trump, against Trump, saying like, oh, well, the Trump supporters won't admit that some Trump supporters won't admit that they're racist. And that kind of talk drives me nuts, because it's not about the individual people. It's about the systems that are creating this. Like we should be asking about Trump. We should be asking about the system that allows Trump to happen. It's not about Trump. I wish we worried about the circus as much as we do the clown in that regard, right? And so if there's one thing, it's thinking, how can I organize within my community and think about this at a systemic level?
Thank you.
Two things really quick, and I think Travis started to say one a little while back, and one is about, giving up power, sharing power, being a bridge, right? Don't wait for people of color to have to extend themselves. We've extended ourselves quite a bit, but you take the initiative. That's what if I could wave a wand and say, you all take the initiative, not in just asking the question, but just take the initiative at this point in history, at this point in dismantling systems, at this point on every front, that's how you can be the best white cultural activist, is if you will be a bridge and if you will take the initiative to dismantle that.
Thank you.
I think I said this earlier, but it's just embrace that discomfort. It's okay not to have it all figured out. Do it anyway. Have the conversations anyway. Ask the questions and ask them to yourself first before you ask them of your children. And you ask them of your school board. Ask yourself first. It is also at the, it's at every level, right? So like you have to attack it everywhere, however you can. But do the individual unlearning, do the individual decolonizing of your mindset. How have I benefited from white supremacy? What are the ways that I continue to benefit from white supremacy? And do it at the individual level before you go out and expect it of others, because once, people will look to you as a model for, especially your children, right? People will look to you as a model for how you are doing it. And it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be messy. Do it anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to note right before you wrap up, Lindsay, we are seeing so many requests for a lot of, resources and such. And I wanted to just let everybody know that all of the panelists have shared great resources with us that we will be posting along with this webinar. So just stay tuned. We know a lot of you are asking about those, and we're really grateful for all the recommendations that they've passed along to us. Lindsay.
Thank you. And I love ending on that note that, just to, first of all, be thinking about the larger systemic issues. I think a lot of people, we're probably preaching to the choir, so to speak, with the people who showed up and attended this event potentially. But, that I think a lot of people don't even want to engage because it's like, well, I'm not racist, right? Like as in racism is bad and racism is only, using certain words or believing certain things. So it's like, well, if I'm not, and I don't feel that I am, that I don't have to engage with these hard issues and discussions. So I think that's a really good way of ending, and also thinking about being, nervous to do something, but to try to go about it anyway, even if, we all have a lot of learning to do. I'm sorry, I'm referring to me and Amanda, not to our guest experts. So anyway, I just want to thank you, everyone who's here. I know we're a few minutes over now. Thank you for attending right to the end. You can let us know what you thought. Victoria should have popped the feedback questionnaire into the chat, so please let us know. We do look at your feedback. Huge thank you to our guests. Dr. Joy Harris-Smith, Dr. Travis Heath, Ms. Leslie Priscilla Arreola-Hillenbrand. We really, really appreciate you taking the time. Like, this is, it's an evening thing. You all have kids, and we really, we know what that's like, and we really appreciate sincerely you taking the time out to do this. And I know a lot of people are going to benefit from these resources. One of the best ways that you can kind of help us keep doing this work is, share the website, share the free resources with others, share them in your networks, and with your school boards, whatever you can. You can also support us by making a contribution to pandemic parenting at our Fundly page. And if that's not possible for you as an individual, totally understandable, especially right now, but we're always looking for organizations who might want to partner with us to sponsor a webinar. So Amanda and I donate all of our time to pandemic parenting, but we have a great small team of early career professionals who make this happen for us and with us. So we have to support them. So if you know of organizations that might want to partner, we would love to hear recommendations. And we have our next webinar coming up in 2 weeks from tonight on Thursday, November 12th. It's called Reimagining the Holidays, Making Memories During a Pandemic. And we're really excited about that because we know a lot of families are nervous as the holidays are approaching. We have a world-renowned guest expert, Dr. Robin Fivish, who is an expert on children's memory and narratives and family storytelling, to talk about kind of how parents talk to their kids about the past and making memories, and how kind of families develop family stories and narratives. So we're looking forward to that. Amanda, do you want to add anything?
I think that's it. Thank you for, just everybody for being here with us. And again, to all of our panelists for taking the time out of your lives to join us. We're so grateful. So thank you.
Thank you so much.